But we'll get back to the official narrative, which I think is important because it's one of the most misunderstood murders in history, really. It's one of the most famous assassinations. It's up there with JFK, for sure, and
Yeah,
Martin Luther
yeah,
King, I
yeah.
think. It's in the top five of all time. And what people think happened is that there was multiple witnesses. If there was anything nefarious, Yoko would have seen it because she was with John. And it was an open and shut case. The guy who did it, everyone saw him do it, and he admitted he did it. He got arrested. He's so horrible, we must never mention his name again. It's an open and shut case. Why are you digging up this past? But when you actually get into the facts of it, it's just not like that at all. So the official narrative, Johnny, I think the thing that your listeners or viewers need to get their head around is they have to get the geography right. So what you've got in the Dakota, which is this big Gothic building that John and Yoko lived in, you've got a driveway which was used originally for horse and cart, and it's kind of cobbled. At the end of the driveway is an iron gate, but before you get to that iron gate, you've got a door on the right as you face it, which has got a little kind of glass vestibule porch area. That's called the vestibule. On the opposite side of that in the driveway, you've got a alcove and a lift that goes down to the basement. So that's the geography. And obviously at the front of at the head of the driveway is the pavement, is the sidewalk. And that's where the doorman had his little gold booth. And that's where Mark Chapman was standing. So it's very important that you get that geography right. So Mark Chapman is at the head, the mouth of the driveway. He's not at the back of the driveway. He's on the street almost. And he's standing near the gold booth on the left-hand side at 10:45 on the 8th of December, 1980, waiting to assassinate John Lennon from what he has described as a compulsion, as a runaway train, as something that he had to do. So John and Yoko at this point, earlier in the day, I won't get into all the signing the album earlier and stuff like that. Let's just get to the specifics of the murder. John and Yoko were recording a Yoko song called Walking on Thin Ice that night at a recording studio in New York. Around about sort of 10:30, John says to the producer, I want to go to a diner and have some food before I go home to the Dakota to sleep for the night. So they leave the recording studio, but for some reason they don't stop off at the diner. Now, the diner is actually on the way home from the recording studio to the Dakota, but for some reason, which I'll get into later, they don't do that. So they turn up right on time, 10:45, outside the Dakota in a grey long limo. So they pull up outside the Dakota. And this is the official narrative, by the way. I'll completely obliterate this shortly. Yoko gets out first. She starts walking down the driveway, past Mark Chapman, past the doorman, and is walking over to the end at the right, to the vestibule doors, which lead up some stairs into the Dakota lobby. Through that lobby, you've got some concierge offices behind the sort of desk lobby area on the left. And beyond that, you've got the apartments, which the concierge, a guy called Jay Hastings, buzzes you through into your apartments. So Yoko's heading towards the Dakota vestibule, up the stairs into the lobby. Behind her, round about sort of 10, 15, 20 feet, it varies a lot according to who you listen to. John gets out of the limo. John walks past Chapman, following his wife, who's way ahead. He looks at Chapman. Chapman looks at him. John walks past Chapman. And now this is according to Chapman and the NYPD and the DA's office. So this is the official narrative. When he's about 20, 25 feet away from Chapman and he's very near the vestibule doors, Mark Chapman gets out a gun and shoots John with 5 bullets from a 5-bullet revolver .38 gun. So it's a chamber, so it's bang. It's not automatic, so it's bang, 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 bang. So he has to wait a split second before each shot. He says he shoots John with 5 bullets, and Mark Chapman says, to this day, he's never wavered. He thinks he shot John 4 times in the back. He doesn't quite figure out what happened to John after he shot him, because he can't remember why John wasn't there. He said in the past that I fired the bullets. He doesn't remember pulling the bead, the hammer. He doesn't remember aiming. He remembers 2 other things, though. He remembers the fact that he was surprised the bullets were working, which is a very strange thing to think. And he also says he doesn't quite know what happened to Lennon after he started firing. Lennon just disappeared. He doesn't remember sort of Lennon falling down or opening a door or going up some steps. He remembers none of that. So it's a very fragmented memory for Mark Chapman. So what you've got in that driveway, you've got Mark Chapman doing this apparent event. You've got the doorman who's there, a guy called Jose Padermo, who we'll get into shortly, who was the alleged Cuban Bay of Pigs CIA guy, which he wasn't, by the way, but We'll get into him shortly. You've got a concierge called Jay Hastings who's in the Dakota in the lobby area where Lennon and Yoko are heading to. Now, he's got a window that's open that's behind the vestibule doors in the Dakota driveway, so he can hear stuff going on, which is very important. So he's kind of an audio witness. You've also got a lift operator called Joseph Manny who's in the basement, which is accessed through a lift, which is opposite the vestibule doors on the right-hand side, but he's down in the basement. Now, he hears gunfire. So you've got three witnesses of it, well, you've got four witnesses that are important. You've got Yoko Ono, you've got Jose Padermo, the doorman, you've got the concierge Jay Hastings, who didn't see it, but he heard it, and you've got the lift operator Joseph Manny, who's down in the basement and heard gunfire. So that's the setup, okay? It's very important that you know who, there was no one else there. There was no witnesses walking past the pavement. There's a cab driver who said he saw Chapman. We'll get into him shortly. But there was no other witnesses that saw the murder, okay? Now, what's really interesting about this is, according to the statement and Chapman's statement, and according to the NYPD and the official narrative, when John was struck with these 4 bullets in his back, apparently hollow point bullets, it's very important that Chapman, the DA's office and the NYPD all say he was using hollow point bullets. They've said it for 42 years. So they all say that happened, which were really destructive bullets, by the way. So when a hollow point bullet hits someone, it opens up inside them. It doesn't normally pass through, and it just literally rips up their internal organs. It's a horrific bullet to use. But apparently John, with these 4 hollow point bullets that all were struck and apparently damaged his heart. We know all the artery drain in his heart was damaged. He then walks up to the vestibule door with these 4 big holes in his back. He pulls open the vestibule door. He walks into the vestibule small porch area. He walks up to some steps, walks up 6 steps, pulls open some very large mahogany open doors, walks into the lobby area, turns left, goes through a swinging door, which is attached to the desk on the left in the lobby area. He's now in Jay Hastings' concierge front office. He has the wherewithal somehow to say to Jay Hastings, "I've been shot." He then carries on this incredible journey through Jay Hastings' front office into a back office that's beyond Jay Hastings' office and collapses and dies. Now, the problem with that, let's just get straight to it. If you talk to all the doctors and nurses who treated John, and even the very dodgy chief medical officer who actually performed the autopsy, they all are very consistent in one thing. They all say that when those bullets hit John, the amount of damage around his heart that instantly happened and occurred, he was dead on impact. But somehow, according to the official narrative, John got out of that vestibule, got out of that Dakota driveway and went on this fantastical journey through the vestibule stairs, doors and offices. Utter hogwash. It's almost impossible to believe that he could do that. So once I got all that information very early on, that this was the official narrative and this was this alleged journey that John went on, I thought, okay, I need to look at this slightly differently. So I thought, what I'll do is, with JFK, you can tell an awful lot from the very dodgy autopsies that were done on him and all the horrible medical evidence that was counter and didn't actually fit the official narrative, especially the early JFK autopsy that was done in Dallas before they managed to nab his body and take it to Washington. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll contact the doctors. I'll contact the doctors that tried to treat John and see if I can get some information from them. Now, the problem with that is there's a doctor called Stephen Lynn, Johnny, who for 30 years has been on every single TV documentary and is featured in every magazine and book saying, "I'm the doctor that tried to save John Lennon, and I held his heart in my hand." So this guy has basically controlled the narrative about John's medical condition, but he never ever goes into detail about where on the back John was shot and where the entrance and exit wounds were. So he's annoyingly controlled that part of the story. Problem is, Johnny, he didn't actually do any of that. He was in the room. He came later because he was the head of the ER. He came later when they were trying to save John. Never touched John's body, never helped, never assisted. But he was the guy that came out and spoke to the media and said John Lennon's dead outside the Roosevelt Hospital. And he got a taste for fame at that point, Johnny. And he thought, you know what? I think I'm going to run with this. I think I'm going to be the doctor that tried to save John Lennon's life. Problem is, Johnny, the actual doctor, the surgeon who tried to save John Lennon's life, a guy called Dr. Halloran, lovely guy, he, for some strange reason, I've asked him many times why he didn't do it, he just basically sat back for 30 years and allowed Halloran to lie. because according to him, he didn't want the hassle, he didn't want the fame, he didn't want to sort of upset the
have you
apple cart.
checked out his other autopsies that he's done? This guy.
Well, no, this isn't an autopsy. This is the surgeon. Yeah.
Sorry, have you seen any? Have you checked out any of the other surgeries that he's done? Or
Yeah,
any of
yeah,
the other...
he's been operating. He was operating about 5 years before Lennon came in. So late, sort of mid to late 70s, he's operating. He was a surgeon right up until a couple of years ago. He retired last year. So a flawless career, flawless guy,
good. Right.
which is great. But what's interesting is I didn't ring him first. I rang another doctor, Johnny. I didn't ring Stephen Lynn because I kind of knew. In 2011, Halloran came out. Halloran came out in 2011, so this guy's lying. I'm the guy who did it. So I knew Halloran was the kind of now official guy who did it. So I won't
Can you
bother
imagine?
with him.
I mean, keep away the trainer you thought you're thinking.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being that guy who's just like, you've lived off a life, like, and it's like a indirect lie that'll get you a really tiny amount of fame in a certain area. I mean, God, can you imagine living that life? Anyway, go on. Sorry.
I don't know how these people live themselves, Johnny, to be honest. But here's the thing. I actually contacted another doctor before I spoke to Dr. Halloran because there's another doctor called Dr. Frank Veteran who also claims that he tried to save John Lennon's life. So I thought, I'll ring him up and I'll have a chat with him. So I had a chat with him. And he gave me an hour-long discussion about how he tried to save John.
I thought you were going to say he was animated like in the Yellow Submarine when I...
Well, yeah, he was very animated when he was talking to me, Johnny.
Oh.
He was saying, but what he said that John was shot all down the left side, right? Which I thought, okay, that's interesting. That's not in the back, as I've always been told, as we've always been told. So he kind of muddied the waters as well, as much as Stephen Lynn. So he gave me this very convincing 1 hour testimony. He also posted a video online of him talking into camera about his traumatic experience of trying to save John Lennon. So I thought, but something was off. So I thought, I'll ring Halloran. So I rang Halloran, managed to get through to Halloran. And the first question I said to Halloran was, just tell me, Dr. Halloran, why wasn't Frank Veteran featured in a dramatic film in 2016 called The Lennon Report? Because what happened in 2016 was, because there was so much confusion about the medical stuff, someone did a dramatic film as a reconstruction of what happened to John when he came into the hospital, right? But Frank Veteran's not in there. And I said to him, why wasn't Frank Veteran put in the Lennon Report film? He went, well, the reason they didn't put him in the film was he wasn't there that night at the hospital. So I thought, okay, so we've now got a second lying doctor. That's quite disturbing and a bit odd. There was also another doctor, a guy called...
Happens a lot in these parts.
Oh, yeah, it does. Well, you've got a doctor called Richard Marks who did help out, but he also embellished his part in it. He said he held John's heart in his hand. So you've kind of got three line doctors. But anyway, I got to Halloran eventually. And the first thing I said to Halloran was, this is very early on in my investigation, I said, so just tell me again, Dr. Halloran, where John was shot in the back. You know, what part of his back was he shot? And he went, he wasn't shot in his back. And I just remember that it was that one moment where I knew my life was about to change.